She remains tied to community. She remains true to the values and realities of the everyday woman.
All large-scale change is actually just a lot of small-scale change happening.
So to me, feminism is more of a social and political struggle against all forms of patriarchal oppression.
If you constantly find that you are the smartest person in the room, you've completely failed at feminist leadership.
Ignite that sparking others to have a passion for a particular cause.
So feminist leadership, one of the things we need to understand is not just about women playing leadership roles, being women or feminine. It's more of where women lead differently with feminist analysis, values, and ideologies to advance social justice for all.
Welcome to the Lead Like a Feminist podcast. I'm Emily.
And I'm Marlene.
Thank you for joining us on our journey to learn from the people using their power to change the status quo.
So as you all know, we've been trying to find our guests by asking you who you know is leading like a feminist. And then we've been making it our responsibility to track them down and try to find out exactly what they're doing that is changing the world around them. So join us and let's change the status quo together.
I wanna be the change. I wanna be the change. Oh, yeah, when I show, yeah.
Before we hear from some amazing people on this first episode about what it means to them to lead like a feminist, here's some reasons why I think you should join me on my journey. Number one, you feel powerless. I think we all sometimes feel like we just can't change any of the big challenges or issues the world is facing. But feminist leadership replaces the idea of a single idealised heroic leader who can solve everyone's problems with the reality that we all need to be involved in leadership for our society to thrive. And I think leading like a feminist starts by recognising that our power actually comes from other people and our ability to unlock their potential and then help them do the same for others. And actually, when we work together towards a shared purpose, that's when we can really turn that sense of powerlessness into a sense of power to create change. Reason number two, you're striving to change the status quo. So trying to create change, real, genuine, systematic change, is really, really tough. And it often feels like one step forwards and two steps backwards. And the thing I've realised is if we really want to change the power structures and the dynamics that are currently shaping our world, we need approaches that set out to explicitly do just that. It's not enough to assume that the current leadership models that we're taught, that we inadvertently learn and start to use, are enough. And actually, many of those models have helped to maintain the current system for decades, and they've been developed by those who've thrived within that system. Reason number three, you're pursuing social justice. So social justice, simply put, is really just the idea that each of us has an equal opportunity to realise our full potential. But that's only really possible when individuals and communities have the power to shape their lives. And feminist leadership in all its different forms is explicitly about redistributing power so that we can all shape our lives and our communities and our society. And it's about redistributing that power in a way that is mindful and inclusive and considers issues of gender, race, social class, sexual orientation and ability in how that power is distributed and used. So those are my reasons for why I'm on this journey and why I invite you to join me over the next 10 episodes to really unpack feminist leadership and think about how we can all lead like feminists. Now, I was recently lucky enough to host an event all about feminist leadership, and so I thought we'd start this series by hearing from some of those people about what feminist leadership is and means to them. And I'd encourage you throughout to start thinking about what it means for you as well. But first, let's hear from Angela Assimwe. So she's a Ugandan lawyer and human rights activist who's spearheaded numerous campaigns to address oppression within Uganda. She was actually sexually abused as a teenager and became a mother when she was only 15. And it was as a result of those really traumatic experiences that she decided to dedicate her whole career to advocating for the rights of girls, women, and other marginalised people. And when I first heard her story, I just had to find out more about her remarkable journey and her experiences as a feminist leader.
I wanna be the change. I wanna be the change. Oh, yeah, when I show, yeah, I wanna be the change. Oh,
so it's an honor and privilege being part of and participating in the IRISE annual gathering. And also, you asked me what is feminist leadership and what it means to me. So first we need to understand what's feminism before knowing what feminist leadership is. So to me, feminism is more of a social and political struggle against all forms of patriarchal oppression. And as an African, the Charter of Principles for African Feminists was adopted in Accra, Ghana, at the first African Feminist Forum, and it was defined in the Charter that as African feminists, our understanding of feminism places patriarchal social relations, structures, and systems which are embedded in oppressive and exploitative structures. So that's more about what feminism is about. And also a feminist, Maria Shah, also defined feminism as the radical notion that women are people. That's the most interesting introduction or definition of feminism that I like. It's just the radical notion that women are people. So feminist leadership, one of the things we need to understand is not just about women playing leadership roles, being women or feminine. It's more of where women lead differently with feminist analysis, values, and ideologies to advance social justice for all. So feminist leadership is basically oriented to a different human order. It's more of challenging the norm, redistributing power and also responsibilities. So we need to understand that it's also about fighting the social inequalities, just like IRISE does great work in regards to fighting and also advocating for period justice and other things, menstrual hygiene. So it's more of fighting social inequality, changing political, social, legal, and cultural structures that are patriarchal. Also, feminist leadership to me is where women and also women organizations can share power, authority, and decision-making in our common pursuit of social, still legal, political, and the cultural inequality. And that's a definition that was put up by Dawn Otario, who is one of the prominent feminist leaders that I look up to. So feminist transformational leadership or leadership is concerned with acquiring or achieving gender justice. As we are in Women's Month, we should know it's also in regards to achieving and ending the biases in regards to women. So the other thing and why it matters to me is because of the principles in regards to feminist leadership. And some of those principles I can air out maybe like 4 of them. One is fairness, justice, and equity. One thing we need to understand is feminist leadership is about social justice, about advocating for women, and not just women, but all women. Just like it's enshrined in our feminist charter, you need to advocate for the rights of women without ifs, buts, or howevers. So you advocate for women's social justice and also the marginalized groups, because most of the times we have many people attending to all the injustices, attending and advocating for the rights of women, but they leave out the marginalized groups of women. So we need to cater for that. That's why the first universal principle of feminist leadership is fairness, justice, and equity. The second one is community. So the other reason why it matters to me is because of community development and collaboration. According to Hooks, she said that everyone's presence and participation must be valued. One of the reasons as to why it matters to me is because even as a young woman that conceived at the age of 14, knowing that I have something that I can run to where my participation, my presence is valued, that means a lot to me. And that's why feminist leadership is very important, because we get to understand that they'll value our presence and also participation. So also sharing the power empowerment. In this, I mean looking at power as shared and elastic enough to be felt by all, irrespective of gender. So feminist leadership is all about empowering self, because it starts with self. As feminist leaders, we believe that the personal is political. Without empowering yourself, you're not able to empower others. I also share maybe that as a young woman at the age of 14, I was sexually abused and I conceived. So when I conceived, through all that I went through, I reached a time and I got sisterhood. I got friends, mentors, and I'm honored that one of them is even on the forum. Lilian Mbarara is one of my mentors. And I also intentionally mentor other young women, and we mentor each other, like Honorable Anna Deke, we mentor each other, Patricia Umola. So it's very important to empower ourselves and also have a sisterhood or women that are prominent women that will support you through this journey. And also you give back, because mentorship is a two-way. When they mentor you, you look out for other young women and mentor them, deliberately mentor them. I remember having this conversation with Honorable Anna Deke last week about mentoring the guild president of Makerere. And when we are sharing, one of the things I realized is we've moved this journey together, but then we realized that there are still very many prominent young women out there that need to get what we got from the women that uplifted us. So we continuously and deliberately share and empower other young women to move this journey with us. So it's empowering yourself first, then you empower others. That's the shared power empowerment. Then lastly, there's what we call authenticity. So as a feminist leader, you need to be an authentic leader. And that's the other interesting bit, and what matters to me is that you know who you are and what you believe in and your values. As a feminist leader, you also need to act upon those values and beliefs while transparently interacting with others. It's very, very important. If you don't know who you are, then you're not authentic. So it's very important for us to understand that being a feminist leader, you need to be authentic and know your values, believe in them, and act upon them so as to transparently interact with others, because you can't with yourself. So we need to always find time for self and ensure that we share and also understand our lives so as to be able to feed others. So that is basically what feminist leadership is all about, Emily.
So Angela mentioned IRISE and period justice, so I thought I would quickly fill you in. So IRISE International is the charity that I founded and now work for as CEO. It's basically my day job. And the charity was set up in direct response to girls raising the challenges that they were experiencing during their periods with me and some of my colleagues, quite a long time ago now. And I basically set out to try and respond to their requests for support. And I think my journey trying to end the shame and inequality people experience because they have a period is really what has led me here to this podcast and to my interest in feminist leadership. So on the surface, I think it's really easy to just focus on people getting pads in the context of period poverty and shame, and to really overlook the power imbalances that mean that something as simple as having a period is systematically overlooked in how we structure our communities, our wider society, and actually our world. And as I started tackling this issue and thinking about the shame, the lack of access to information, the lack of access to period products, I realised that I didn't really want more pads, toilets, or even period education as much as I wanted more marginalised women, girls, and other people affected by the issue to have more power and more of a say and more control over their bodies and lives. And I started to see that many of the efforts to address these challenges seemed tokenistic. It felt like putting a band-aid on a gaping wound, when really what was needed was some more serious and disruptive change around how we listen to and enable young women, girls, and other people to lead. And that's what really led me to feminist leadership, to this podcast, and to the journey that we're on together to learn how we can actually change the status quo. So next, we're going to hear from Patti Whaley. So she's worked with social justice and environmental charities as a senior manager or a trustee for over 30 years, and mostly in the UK. The charities she's worked for include Amnesty International, ActionAid, the British Institute for Human Rights, and Safe Passage International. She was actually chair of the board when ActionAid introduced their Feminist Leadership Principles across the organisation. And I was really keen to hear more about her experiences during that process. But before we hear from her, I'll quickly run through ActionAid's Feminist Principles, which she'll comment on. And they are, number 1, self-awareness. So this is about leading with empathy and an open mind. Number 2, self-care and caring for others. This is about taking care of our emotional and physical well-being and supporting others to do the same, and particularly through providing flexibility and a supportive work environment to those who do have caring responsibilities. Number 3 is about dismantling bias. So this is about challenging discrimination in our practices and our policies. 4 is inclusion. This is about creating ways for everyone to be equally heard, respected and successful. 5 is sharing power and creating spaces for others to lead. 6 is responsible and transparent use of power, including clear, timely and transparent decision making. 7 is accountable collaboration, recognising and valuing successful collaboration when it happens. 8 is respectful feedback, so seeking, giving and valuing constructive feedback as part of a two-way process. 9 is courage, the courage to seek transformative change. And 10 is zero tolerance, and a commitment to call out any form of discrimination or abuse of power. So now we'll go over to Patti to hear more from her about this list and about putting it into action.
I wanna be the change. I wanna be the change. Oh,
A common reaction that I get to this list is, well, this is just common sense. I mean, it's just good management. What is so revolutionary and feminist about this list? And I think it goes to one of the things that Angela mentioned, that you have to understand this list in the context of the feminist analysis of power. Feminism, to me, is not necessarily about putting women first, or certainly not about making individual men feel bad for being men, but it is about analyzing the systemic power structure of society, whether those power structures relate to gender or race or class or sexuality or disability or age or really anything else. Any power system that excludes people is something that feminism is interested in, whether that's at an individual or at a collective level. And you have to understand the 10 points and use them in this context. They do mostly each have some specific resonance with how women and minorities have been excluded, or with how women have undermined their own power in the past. But at a meta level, the whole package is about building a culture that's more explicitly aware of power. Not necessarily that power is a good thing, but how you use power to include and to enable participation rather than to exclude or to dominate people. So what I want to do is give just some practical examples of kind of the creative daily work that it takes to make these principles work on a practical level. My job at ActionAid was to make the principles work in how the board worked together. And so that's where a lot of my examples come from, but I have found that they apply in many, many different contexts. Often people say that they want to be inclusive, but it actually takes often a lot of creativity and perseverance to find good, non-judgmental ways to bring more people into the circle. So here are a few practical examples. When I was at Amnesty International, there was always an annual meeting of the country directors, similar to this one. And we found that it was often dominated by the directors of the large northern offices because they have the most money and they're accustomed to having the most say and they're often the most experienced, and they just intimidated other people. We found that we could counterbalance this by having a startup meeting the day before that was attended only by the directors of the smaller, less wealthy offices. And once they had their own conversation underway and kind of had their own momentum going, then they were much more confident about continuing to participate in the full meeting. And the main meeting got much richer for everyone. It was helpful for everybody. Something that often happens in meetings is that the first speaker, or the speaker who is the most dominant person, influences everyone in the room, so that whatever point of view gets put out first tends to suppress other points of view. And boards experiment with different ways of getting around this. For example, experiments tell us that if you get everybody to write down what they think before anybody addresses an issue that has been raised, you'll get more variety of responses. People will stick to their own point of view much better. Or you can go around the room in different ways and get people to speak in different orders. Often, it's important to monitor who speaks and for how long. There are apps, for example, for tracking how much men speak versus how much women speak. Although I think my favorite example of this was there was a meeting where a woman just sat knitting a scarf, and she would pick up the red thread whenever men talked and pick up a green thread whenever women talked. And so at the end of the meeting, you sort of had this visual record of how much men versus women had talked in the meeting, which I thought was very clever. We could have used that in Amnesty to track how much the northern offices speak versus how much the southern offices speak. And I think we would have learned a lot from that. We also worked at ActionAid at becoming more respectful listeners, better listeners, not just learning not to interrupt people or listen actively, but to listen more sympathetically. Not with the often there's a phrase called predatory listening, when you listen with the view of figuring out how I can where I can pick holes in your argument or how I can get one up on you. And the opposite of that, respectful listening with a view not just to understanding what you say, but really actively considering that you may be right, is something that takes a lot of practice. We also worked on becoming more comfortable with disagreement and opposing views. We had a really good-natured board at ActionAid. We were very comfortable with each other. Our trust levels were very high, and we always tended to want to agree. But sometimes that's not really the best thing to do. Sometimes it's better to live with disagreement for a while and kind of bottom it out and see what's underlying the disagreement. And accept that even after you've done that, people may not all agree with a final decision. The point is not to have less disagreement, but to have better disagreement, more creative and respectful disagreement, so that you get to a better decision at the end. We also had to learn to become more comfortable with being wrong and letting others be right. There's such a powerful social pressure never to admit that you're wrong. But in the do's and don'ts for ActionAid's feminist leadership, my favorite one of the do's and don'ts was the one that said, if you constantly find that you are the smartest person in the room, you've completely failed at feminist leadership. It was kind of funny, but actually it's quite true. It's quite true. Assuming that you're, admitting that you're wrong is hard, but it requires learning to separate judgmentalness from being wrong. There's a great practice in English choir, English church choirs. When you do something wrong in a rehearsal, you just hold up your hand. That's it. Nobody needs to say anything. Everybody knows that the reason that sounded wrong is because Patti came in at the wrong time. You don't need to stop. The choir director doesn't need to point out that I was wrong. I've said, I know what was wrong and I will fix it. And there's nothing judgmental about it. It's a very wonderful practice, but very hard to do I think, in other environments. So those are just some examples of how we devise ways of making meetings and discussions more open, more flexible, more inclusive, more participative. It doesn't happen automatically. You have to actually work at it. I'll make 2 quick points in closing about feminist leadership. As Angela mentioned, this is a journey. This is not an easy thing to do. It's quite hard work, actually. If you engage with feminist leadership deeply, it's a path. It's not a magic solution. It doesn't make it easier to take good decisions or find good solutions, at least not in the short term. If you allow space for more voices, if you allow room for more disagreement, it may make decisions more difficult. It may make things take longer. But you can reasonably expect that you'll get better decisions in the long term. You'll get stronger teams, you'll get more trust, you'll get more space for people to develop their skill and potential. But it's not a magic shortcut. It's important to understand that. It should be challenging. It should sometimes be uncomfortable and inconvenient. If it isn't, I think you're not really changing anything, because change is hard. ActionAid's been doing this for some years, and they still have significant challenges. For example, the fact that most money is still raised in the North, and money is inextricably associated with power. Money from the North comes with some really onerous donor requirements about reporting things and tracking everything. And this makes managing financial power within the ActionAid Federation a very tricky thing. And conflict over that doesn't disappear. It's just about committing to a path of learning to confront that and manage it in a better and more inclusive way. The second thing that I will just close with is I'm often asked, do we have to call the principles feminist? That's probably not such a problem in this group, but often people think, oh, feminism, oh, it's such an alienating word. Oh, it makes people so defensive. Why do we have to call things feminist? And that question made me think about, why is that important? For me, feminism is not about becoming incrementally a better manager. It's not about, as I said before, things getting better and better, but never really changing. It's about changing the power structure. And you can't change a power structure unless you can name what it is. You can't change a system of historic privilege unless you can acknowledge what the privilege is. And we're seeking to change the power structure, not just for women, but for everyone who's been excluded, whether that's because of race or class or sexuality or age or any other aspect of identity. Systemic privilege is least visible to the people who have it. And so the people who have it, it's particularly important for them to say the word feminism, because they need to continually remind themselves that they are trying to change the power system and use their power in a more inclusive way. And that's a commitment that men and women can both make, and that will help men as well as women. The aim is not to be better. The aim is to really be transformative and to transform power structures and the way they construct society. I haven't found a better word. Some people find feminism a bit exclusive, that it's too much focus on women, but I haven't found a word that better expresses that sense of challenge and reminding ourselves to be aware of our own power and privilege and use it positively. I haven't found a better word for feminism, so feminism is still the word that I'm using. I hope that will be helpful to you. And I look forward to some discussion. Thank you.
So I'm really lucky to be working with an amazing co-conspirator on this podcast. So Marlene Kinyue from Africolour Arts is an amazing young Kenyan leader and founder. And on this first ever Lead Like a Feminist podcast, I also wanted to find out more about her journey so far and why she's decided to join me on this adventure. So over to you, Marlene.
I wanna be the change. I wanna be the change.
So let me start by saying that leadership is not that easy. Sometimes leadership feels overrated, but at the end of the day, it requires so much things to be done. Because when it comes to leadership, it's more about being there for the people who are responsible for the job. So you find that from day to day, it becomes a challenge. So you see, all through my life, I've learned that leadership is more about teamwork. It's more about guidance. It's more about nurturing people's abilities and talents in order to achieve a certain goal, leading people towards believing in a common goal. You find that in most cases, the dream is of the dream bearer, the founder, the CEO, the management, and other people also need to see goodness through different lenses. And that's why we find that collaborative leadership is more about understanding exactly what are the gaps in everything you're doing and including your people to bring about solutions. So my journey is not simple either. I grew up in Nairobi, Kenya, and you find that our challenges are different as compared to people living in different areas in the world. You find that here we have a very large educated youth population that is unemployed, that is jobless. And you find that striving in such an environment is not that easy. Some of us who have gone through education, we've been able to have our papers, that is our degrees. Some of them have their masters. You find that finding a job has not been that easy because we have very many people with so many papers, but they just lack the opportunity to build their careers. And most of all, there is no capital or good working environment to help you build your own business. So Africolour Art is a social enterprise that champions art and mental health. And you find that in this era, and especially what the pandemic has taught us, is that mental health is a very important factor in every day-to-day's life. Mental health is the reason why some of us flourish better than others, is the reason why some people tend to be withdrawn as compared to others. And we have been able to see the other side of invisible disabilities. And you find that so many people are affected by issues to do with mental health. But when you come from a country where mental health is not such an important factor, or people do not feel like it is an important factor, many people have cited the fact that this current generation is weak, and that's why it cannot be able to tackle mental health related challenges. But at the end of the day, you find that mental health challenges come about when people are really struggling, and they really want to thrive. So at Africolour Art, we use our different art skills. And that's why in some cases we do art and dance therapy, just to create an environment where we can talk about mental health related challenges. And we try to encourage creativity by including creatives in having some of the events where we share our skill. We create an environment where people can enjoy and feel safe. And while people are sharing, we try to create safe spaces for them to share and feel like they're part of a group. So why lead like a feminist? Leadership is more like a multifaceted topic. And it's not only a topic because it involves being part of something. In most cases, we say being part of something bigger than yourself. And when it comes to leadership, I have come to realize that most people are in specific teams because of their leaders. And you find that they see something in their leaders, and they even tend to believe in a specific dream. So the best thing that leaders can do is to try and create an environment that people can thrive by being part of a bigger dream. And that's why today I've joined Emily to do the Lead Like a Feminist podcast, so that we can learn more about how we can be able to change the status quo, and maybe even be able to get some of the best skills to help some of the best leaders in the world to be able to create change and create an enabling environment for their communities.
I wanna be the change. I wanna be the change. Oh, yeah, and I show, yeah.
We come to the final post-mortem. So, Emily, how do you feel about issues of patriarchal oppression, and how experiences where you have had to go out of your comfort zone to prioritize other people's needs just to bring about change?
So I was thinking about this, and I think something that Patti said actually really struck me, which was, she said it's often people who have privilege who are least aware of who are least aware of it. And I suppose the more privilege you have, the less aware you are that you have it. And so I used to actually be a doctor, and I studied medicine. And I think it took me a long time to recognise how patriarchal many of the structures in medicine are, because I was in it and I was part of it, and in many ways perpetuating those kind of difficult power structures. And so I think when I would see patients, I would sometimes think, oh, they just don't understand. And I think what I learned was actually I need to listen to them. And it was by listening to them that I started to see some of the issues in the medical system, in the way that we view health. And that actually led me to founding iRise, the organisation that I now work for, which is really focused on addressing the systematic inequalities that people experience because they have a female body. We focus a lot on periods, but that's just one really good example of this issue, where actually periods are really poorly understood, they're poorly researched, because traditionally medicine has been very focused on the male body and the male experience. I think the default, the first one in all your textbooks is the male one. And I think the shift is you shift from thinking, I know, why don't people listen to me, to listening to people and realizing everything that you don't know and everything that is, I suppose, all the blind spots in how you're viewing the world. So yeah, I think that kind of really brought home for me that bit of my personal journey. It's not just about social change, it's also practical. If you make systems that enable and empower people, then society functions better.
For us to experience change, we have to think about redoing these structures to suit the current generation, the current trends, technology, and all that. So we cannot still rely on the same structures if we want to see change. And that's where I think feminist leadership comes in handy, because we have to think about why other people's ideas are important, and that is how we end up prioritizing other people's needs, the people we serve, as well as challenging some of those oppressive systems as well. So thank you very much, Emily, for that. It was a pleasure.
Great, thank you.
I wanna be the change, oh, yeah, when I show, oh, yeah, I wanna be the change, oh, yeah, when I show, oh, yeah.
If you like what you heard today, remember to subscribe to the Lead Like a Feminist podcast for information on new releases, and please do share with your family, friends and social networks. You can also interact with us directly on social media, on LinkedIn, Twitter or Instagram, or get in touch at leadlikeafeminist@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts on today's podcast. And finally, we'd like to say a massive thank you to Africolour Arts for helping to produce the podcast, and to the amazing Sherry Owasi for letting us use her track Be The Change. Do check out her full album Queendom on Spotify. It's pretty awesome. And also finally to Chelsea Madison for all her help with our social media. More from us next time, and in the meantime, keep on changing the status quo.